Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session of first-person identity system for open source, which, as you can see here, is a trilogy, which will start with a warm-up. This is what you and I are going to do here first, to set the stage, so to speak, for the first-person identity system for open source. After that, we're going to scale out with my colleague Wenjing Chu, who is taking you on a more technical deep dive for the foundation of the first-person identity system for open source, with the focus on the trust spanning protocol. And from there, Drummond is telling you something about how the whole thing is going to evolve as the first-person identity system, as well as the first-person project. So let's get started. Come in. Okay, my part is about trust in open source without losing the trust part. So my name is Martina Kolpondinos. I'm the founder of Kosma Connect, which is a boutique consulting company that offers services to support self-sovereign identity topics. I came into the self-sovereign identity space about 3 years ago when I attended my first internet identity workshop in California, and have been active in the space since then as a member of the Decentralized Identity Foundation, a co-editor of the DID method, DID-WH, and a co-builder of the trust ecosystem for the Swiss EID and the Swiss credential ecosystem. So today I'm going to take you on a journey, which we start at a story that is quite known in open source by now. We won't linger too long on the story, but we need it. You will see why. And from there, then we zoom out. We zoom out to frame the trust challenge space in open source, and land, in that sense, on the first-person project to set the stage for a first-person identity system for open source. And if you think like, oh, I don't want to show my ID, what is that about an identity system and so on, so don't worry, this is good when you have those thoughts, because this means you're absolutely at the right place today. So let's start with the story. A contributor. As it goes, the traditional way of participating in a project over time, large number of contributions, and eventually gets maintainer rights. At that point, someone asks, who actually is this? And nobody knows. So most of you may already know where I'm going here. It's like a rough plot, so to speak, of the XC attack. But this is not a blame game here. In contrary, this doesn't necessarily scream security is broken. It rather screams trust is scaling out of bounds. Because this is what actually happened with the XC attack, right? There was this contributor, and over time gained trust with the completely plausible social behavior, and eventually, boom. So the question here rather is, how did we get to this point where merit alone is not enough anymore? And to answer this question, let's take a quick look at the history of open source. So open source comes from like a niche alternative to today, like it has evolved into a foundational building block that is present in many industry-level systems, right? Cloud, AI, edge, you name it. And this is a great accomplishment, but with that also comes responsibility. Because today, open source is underneath hospitals, power grids, and governments. So the question is not, is open source important? The question is, how can we keep it trusted in an era where threats and regulatory requirements are growing? So let's start with the threats. The threats have become, and the attacks actually have become more and more sophisticated and professionalized. But as we've seen before, they don't actually need to be that professionalized if someone just can take the time to build trust within a community, right? And so we have two things here. We have those attacks and threats and their direct impact, but what we also have is the fear of those threats and attacks. And this causes one of the major risks today in open source, and especially in the open source supply chain, which is the erosion of trust. And if this happens, adopter may pull out resources as well, which then puts projects at strain, right? And this increases vulnerabilities, which further erodes trust. And I mean, you get it. So this was the threat and the attack side. On the other side, we have the regulatory requirements. So nations and geopolitical unions, such as across the EU and Europe, are raising the bar, also to address those sort of threats, which is understandable. But it's not only them who are concerned, it's also the open source community, right? Because contributors want to be able to trust co-contributors at scale and over time, right? And so as Jim Zemlin, the executive director of the Linux Foundation, very bluntly put it, the days of minimal scrutiny are over. But what does this mean? I mean, from a technical perspective, a very comparable, easy solution is put something like a know your customer in front of open source, and the problem is fixed. Not quite fixed, but one step in that direction. As I mentioned, from a technical perspective, because the challenge here is this would sacrifice the core values of open source. So permissionless entry and global participation are both sacred and needed, and regulations would put them at risk and challenge the participation part. But it's, as I mentioned before, it's not necessarily the regulation, not always. It's also, very importantly, the way how we implement those regulations. And so the question now is, what do we do? I mean, we have the challenge space, which I've brought you here now. We have seen know your customer like solutions are not really solutions. So what do we do? And here again, Jim Zemlin made a call, a pretty loud one, for a decentralized trust system in open source. And such a system would actually respect that innovation comes from unexpected places, and I would even add, and it does not stop with borders. And this is exactly the space where the first-person project comes into play. So now you may ask, first-person what? The first-person project is a community collaborative effort which strengthens trust in online relationships. You can also think about it as designing the ingredients for a layer of trust on the internet. It is not a legal entity, and I really want to emphasize this point. So to give you a little bit broader, better, but still high-level idea what it is decentralized, and it supports decentralization. It's technology and governance agnostic, so it really helps single ecosystems, and the ecosystems are the ones that actually decide the governance framework and the technology that they want to use, and it's extending and not replacing. So all the things that work, for example, with regard to security, keep your key signing parties, whatever, it really just adds a layer of trust on top of that. So the benefits, or one of the key ingredients of the first person project, is proof of personhood. This does not ask who you are, it just says that you are a real person, which is increasingly important in the age of AI. And it says you're a real person, not a bot, not a swarm, again, specifically for an ecosystem. But this, to be honest, is not enough, right? Because an XC attack could still have happened. So what's next? Verifiable relationships. And this, again, it does not ask what type of relationships you have. It just says you're a fellow citizen, an employee, a team member, a conference attendee. And this, in fact, adds an attestation to the validity of your identity and may, in fact, have prevented an XC attack. So when you put those two together, per ecosystem, what you get is like a first-person identity that is unique to that ecosystem for yourself and is privacy-preserving and bears a verifiable level of trust. This is a lot of words on this slide, so to just put it very simple, it proves that you are a real person with real trust relationships. Okay, but what does this now mean for open source, right? So this means that the first-person project with its ingredients can facilitate a decentralized first-person identity system for open source as asked for by Jim Zemlin. And I would like to give you an example here. This example also builds on actually an idea that he described, but it's tied a little bit more to the first-person project. So he used the example of trust scorecards. Again, to walk you through briefly, here you have different levels of roles from novice, contributor to maintainer that are mapped to some kind of rule system, or you can call it governance framework that is designed or created from a specific ecosystem. And by ecosystem here, I mean, for example, an open source project. So when we take a closer look at such a scorecard, we have gating factors. And importantly, we don't only have gating factors that are related to an internal project history, but they go way beyond. You have seen before in the verifiable relationship, for example, conference attendance is something else. All of those gating factors have different criteria, and all the criteria have some value, which could also be weighted depending on the trust framework that is behind it, which in the end gives a score that again maps to the role as we've seen before. So this means, for example, on the left side, you have a low score, which only gives read-only access. And if we reveal the entire thing, we see that on the left side, that the subject who is associated with the XC attack would only have had read access, so most likely the XC attack could have prevented. So let's sum it up. We have on the one side the trust challenge space by the two parts of threats, attacks on one side, and regulations on the other side, while wanting to keep the core values of open source. Then we have the open source innovation space, right, which is an important part for open source, that you keep it open. And we have the first person project in the middle with the proof of personhood and the verifiable relationship as the core ingredients which build together the first-person identity. Then we have something from an ecosystem, in this case from the open source ecosystem, like the trust scorecards, which build like a governance framework. And together, this manages to address the trust challenge space so that we have the innovation space kind of, let's say, it's safe. But as you see here, not all lines are through. So we have the global participation, which you may ask rightfully, yeah, okay, but now if I understood it correctly, this is only about one ecosystem. What about having multiple ecosystems? And this is exactly what Wenjing Chu is going to talk about in part 2. And then we have the privacy part, which, yeah, it's addressed. You don't need to say who you are and so on, but there is still, say, some nuances that are very important underneath that Drummond Reed is going to tell you about with the decentralized trust graph. And I'm really sorry, I forgot to mention this in the beginning. As you have realized, I'm here by myself, so my 2 colleagues unfortunately couldn't make it in person, but they pre-recorded their sessions, and so stay tuned for the next 2 parts.
Hello, my name's Wenjing Chu. I'm a technical advisor member for the Open Wallet Foundation, the Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust, and a steering committee member for Trust OIP. And more, I think, relevant here is a co-author of the TSP or Trust Spanning Protocol specification and a maintainer for the TSP's SDK. So I'm going to follow up with this more technical topic about TSP as the foundation of a first-person identity system for open source. TSP need to solve several problems that Martina highlighted earlier. And in order for the open source community to address some of the root cause of trust and supply chain related problem, we need a strong identity system. But we also want to have a first person identity system that protect our privacy. The two are really the 2 sides of the same coin, and we must have both. In addition, we also want a global interoperability. And why is that? I want to explain to you. Global interoperability means that we want to preserve open source as a worldwide community, which, it's, I think, the highest risk of the effective open source community is fragmentation. So we like to preserve the permissionless entry and worldwide participation as the fundamental cornerstone of open source. Number 2, we want different open source projects and community can continue to have different policies. We don't want to one size, sort of requirement to overwhelm all projects. So some may want to keep it just as is. Some may want to have a stronger authentication assurances. Number 3, we want to also be able to accommodate and support different regulations that are being put into place or emerging in many different jurisdictions. And some, again, have stronger ID requirements, some have less. Some have very strong data protection requirement and regulations. And so they vary significantly. And we want to adopt all of those with a single standard method so that we are able to work together, but accommodate these differences in many different type of developers and projects. So I want to start with a simple concept that I think is fundamental for trust spanning protocol. And this is a conceptual diagram of a wallet. And I use this very abstractly. So the wallet could simply be something in a command line. It could be embedded into a browser. A lot of work is going on to enable that. Or it can, more familiar to a lot of people, show up as an app in a mobile phone. But conceptually, inside the wallet, this is the blue box. We talk about two things. One is a identifier, the IDs on the lower portion, and in the higher portion, credentials, which are information that's provable to a observer or to a third party. And so the credentials are verifiable information. And here are some examples of identifiers in the lower layer. And there are many different types of identifiers, and TSP is designed to support the diversity of these identifiers. And one particular example I want to highlight as you think about conceptualize them is a self-certifying identifier, a SCID called did web VH. VH means verifiable history, and web just means that the operations are web-based. And in the credentials example, we want to, we have been already seeing a lot of these credentials being used. So MDL is commonly used in the United States for driver license. OIDC for VC, for example, is one type of credentials that's been adopted by the European Union for EUID. And W3C define a verifiable credentials can be used really for standard credential documentation and exchange. And the first person projects are working on a new type of credential. We call them person-to-person credentials or relationship credentials. I think Drummond Reed would cover a lot of that detail later after me. But these are all being supported within the framework for TSP. And so with this information, the TSP, what it does is that it allows one party with a set of verifiable information and another party with a set of verifiable information, but they may be from different issuers, they may come from with different countries or with different standards and formats, be able to exchange and establish a trustworthy, authentic relationship. And so that's a very fundamental functionality to have. With that, TSP also allows you to have confidentiality for the communication and metadata privacy, which I address in more detail later, between the parties, and therefore providing interoperability between these parties that may have different identifiers and may have different credentials, but be able to communicate using the same protocol and therefore be able to make a trust judgment on the both sides. So the lower layer, we call that trust spanning layer. The higher layer is called trust task layer. I'm going to show you some examples of the trust task layer here. And so even though we're showing a lot of credentials, but really it's any type of verifiable information. And because the verifiable ID itself is verifiable, so this information exchange really allows that verification to happen with high assurance, right? And so the examples of trust taxes here are, for instance, trust registries. You need to look up some information from a database. You can do credential exchange. We talk about that you may want to check somebody's driver license or their government-issued ID. You can do selective disclosure for privacy. You can do CKP, a zero-knowledge proof for privacy. You could also do, for example, agreement. You can do disclosure agreement, for instance. So all of those are examples of trust tasks. And with TSP and its SDK, these trust tasks becomes very, very easy to implement. And so the developers can use their existing known implementation and development schemes and environment and be able to confidently implement these features. Finally, I want to talk about the metadata privacy, which is a unique feature I think TSP enables. So TSP allows us to form a privacy-protected network through intermediaries. In this picture, the middle boxes within that cloud are these intermediaries, as some people also call them routers. And the endpoint, therefore, be able to protect their metadata or hide their paths of that they're taking within this cloud. So that's very different from today's internet, and that protects our metadata privacy. Finally, if we put all these together, we can see a high-level view of how such an open source project may work. I use Git as an example, but it doesn't have to be a Git-based system. So in this example, the left side is a developer's wallet, and within it we may have pseudo-anonymous identifiers. We can have other kind of identifiers. We can have authoritative credentials issued by employers, organizations, even governments. We could also have individually managed web of trust, personal endorsement of our friends and people we know. So those also become strong credentials in this system. And TSP link all them together, allow that to happen. So we are currently working with Linux Foundation kernel project to define and develop such a system and to support their workflow. And on the right side, you will see many different kind of projects. Each project may be based on very different host platforms. They will adopt different policies. In the kernel project, the policy is quite strong. You want people working on the kernel, Linux kernel, to be really trustworthy in very strong sense. And another project developing games and other projects may choose to adopt much easier and more flexible policies, and it's up to the project to define those policies. And I think TSP and this credential scheme allow them to vary based on their needs and be able to adopt strong to very flexible and open policies as they see fit. So with such a system, the Linux Foundation infrastructure would be able to support, I think, a seamless developer experience. It will make the trust task development very easy to do, that you don't need to be a specialized expert in this environment to be able to implement such a feature. Projects can adopt very community-driven policies, again, as they see need. Projects can adopt authoritative policies to comply with regulations. Global interoperability is preserved, so developers from worldwide any region can provide what authoritative information they can have access to and prove their identity, for example, or be compliant with their local requirements. And we also provide strong security and privacy assurances, much stronger than the status quo, and it's on this very scalable path towards worldwide adoption among developers. So with that, I'm going to leave you with a QR code where you can get access to this slide deck itself, and also a link for the TSP draft specification. We welcome your input there. The link to the TSP SDK's open source GitHub. And we welcome you to join that effort. And if you are interested, please join us on that Discord link as well. Thank you very much. And then I'll pass back to Martina. Thank you.
So I'll submit your clapping to him. Thank you for your attention of this recording. Just to sum it up, to give you an idea where we are. So on the right side, now Wenjing was talking about the trust spanning tree protocol. So we have fixed that. And next, Drummond Reed in his recording is talking a little bit shorter about the decentralized trust graph. So enjoy.
Hi, my name is Drummond Reed. I'm co-organizer of the First Person Project and a member of the steering committee at Trust over IP. I'm here today to talk to you about the decentralized trust graph that is behind the first person identity that Wenjing and Martina have been describing. The basic concept is similar to the idea of the web of trust that's been around for years, but it's more refined because we're specifically after an architecture that will permit scalable and very privacy-preserving proof of personhood. To do this, to build this trust graph, we need two specific kinds of verifiable digital credentials. These are standard format digital credentials, such as the W3C standard, but a specific type of credential that we need to design. One is called personhood credentials, and the other one verifiable relationship credentials. I'll quickly explain what these are. First, personal credentials were introduced in a breakthrough paper that came out a year ago in August. Here's a snapshot of the title page, all 32 authors and their affiliations. The ones you see the yellow highlight on also attended a workshop that DARPA, the US Defense Department research agency, held in February of this year because proof of personhood in the age of Gen AI was becoming a national cybersecurity issue. And I highly recommend the paper. You've got a QR code there you can scan to get it. It's 63 pages, but it boils down to these two requirements. That issuers of personal credentials have governance in place so they issue one per real person. And secondly, that the credentials, when you're presenting them, are protected by technologies like zero-knowledge proofs, so they are unlinkable and you can use them and still have pseudonymous identity. Now, that means that there are literally thousands of different potential issuers that could do that because there are many different entities that today actually have to keep track of unique human beings. Governments do it, corporations, universities, nonprofits, many different potential issuers for personhood credentials. But that's only half of what we need for a decentralized trust graph. What we also want to capture is relationships that are peer-to-peer, person-to-person, where two people actually know each other. This is where the term first person came from. And for that, we need something called a verifiable relationship credential. My favorite explanation of that came from Linux Foundation Executive Director Jim Zemlin when he called it the modern equivalent of a PGP key signing party. And this is what he means by that. There are two stages of this. First, Bob and Alice meeting here, for instance, at a conference. They're going to do the same ceremony as when they might connect on LinkedIn or WhatsApp or Signal or WeChat, which is Alice shows a QR code to Bob, who scans it, and then his agent of wallet automatically generates a key pair, and we call it a decentralized identifier, a DID document. This is a W3C standard, and that's sent back over to Alice's agent of wallet, which confirms the nonce, and then she does the same thing for him. We call this pairwise private DID exchange, and it creates a personal private channel between those two agents of wallets that they can now use for anything. Now, part two is, having created that, their agents' wallets now can issue verifiable relationship credentials. You see here the series of steps, Bob producing his with a pairwise, the pair of pairwise private DIDs, a date stamp, and he signs it with his private key. That's issued to Alice. She verifies that and does the same thing back to Bob. Now, that's how they can actually prove they have a relationship with each other, but how, when they want to prove that to others, can they do that? That's the role of what we call personas. Personas are additional DIDs that are used just for intentional correlation. With them, they can have public personas that they want to share. They can have community personas or private personas. In the case of Linux Foundation, we're talking about your persona as an open source developer, either across all of the LF or across all open source or specific to some set of projects. So once you've done that, now both Bob and Alice can prove this relationship to anyone. And now the combination of being able to prove you're unique, a person within an ecosystem, and then the set of relationships you have in that ecosystem produces your decentralized trust graph against which you can do zero knowledge proofs, maintaining your privacy, but proving you are a real unique person with greater and greater strength. That's the essence of the decentralized trust graph. And we're going to be standardizing these components in a new working group. TrustRP is launching the second week of September. And we want to invite you to be part of it. You can scan this QR code to join that. And we would very much look forward to having you there, helping us build this privacy-preserving proof of personhood solution for the whole internet. Thank you very much. And I'm turning you back over to Martina now.
Okay. So this is where we were and what Drummond was talking about. And this is where we are. So we now have the entire picture based off a potential first person identity system for open source, shown on the basis of an example for the trust scorecards. And yeah, thank you for your attention and for your interest. If you have any questions. Yeah, we have 2 minutes left. Otherwise, here you just see the QR codes for, we have a first-person mailing list, which is about once a month. You get information about the latest developments, what happened and what's going to happen. Then we have the slide deck for the trust spanning tree from Wenjing, and the website of the first-person project. So, thank you. Okay, if there aren't any questions. So.
Revocation.
You start with the easy one. Maybe let's take this offline. So I will stick around here after the session. So if you have some in-depth, by the way, I have here a note. I need to repeat the questions. So his question was about revocation. So if anyone has some in-depth question, I will stick around afterwards. We can take a look. Yes, please.
By increasing the governance to contribute to open source, is there also the risk of losing the people who want to contribute?
So just to make sure I understood the question and they get it on video, you're asking if the governance framework is, or the governance is strengthened, let's say, the risk of losing people on the way. I mean, the governance, as I mentioned before, first-person project is governance agnostic, let's say, and so it doesn't really say what type of governance you need to use. So it's really completely up to the ecosystem. As mentioned before, also by Wenjing, if you have an ecosystem, let's say a project on the kernel project, which has really, really strict rules on how you can participate and contribute, then the governance is pretty strict, right? And as a contributor or participant, either you comply or you don't. But this is really completely up to the specific ecosystem and the issuer of the personal credential in the first place. And yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
So, but if projects are using like this trust scorecard without realizing what it's aggregated from, does that mean that projects are asking for things that they would not have otherwise decided to ask for, like, are you in good standing with the environment?
Not sure if I understood the question correctly. So you're saying if the scorecard is going to be introduced?
Like, maybe projects don't know what goes into being in that.
Okay.
They don't know what they're actually.
So the framework, again, the governance or the rule system, so to speak, behind such a scorecard. Again, I called that governance framework because it's completely up to the specific project slash ecosystem. So if an ecosystem wants to use a scorecard, they can do that, but they are actually the ones that are responsible to design the rules. So how many points do you need to level up for example, and how do you actually get the points, how are they weighted, and so on. So even if you have scorecards in different projects, that doesn't mean that they have the same rules underneath. Sorry, can you speak?
CNA community wise regulation, because right they are asking for a lot of rules and things, so that I mean, some kind of cooperation in this project, which would be like the great solution for some they could ask for instance, the development and rules participating in any of it would be nice solution.
Yeah, to repeat the question. Thank you. If it can be very bluntly said, applied to the CRA scope. I mean, I'm not too familiar with it, but in essence, there is no limitations. I mean, you have an ecosystem. That ecosystem can be either a project, it can be whatever, what your hobby is in, right? And so whenever an ecosystem wants to participate then and to use the first-person project for their purposes, then they can do that. So it really just provides the ingredients, but how you kind of shape how it's actually working within an ecosystem, that's completely up to the ecosystem. Okay, I think, yeah, we're past time, so if there are any further questions, as I mentioned, I'll stick around and be happy to take them. Have a good day. Thank you again.